Bob, thank you for being here again. And on China, as you know, I appreciate the fact that you are so focused on that because it's incredibly complex, incredibly important, and strongly support us landing that plane, and I hope you have success in doing it. Tell us today what you think the timing is on China.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate your leadership in this area, and I walk by that picture every single day, and I look at all these ugly former USTRs, and there you stand right in the middle of it. So it's
the ugliest of all. By the way, 13 years ago, I was thinking I was sitting in that exact seat when Chuck Grassley was chairman of this committee talking about the WTO. So some things never change.
Whatever happened.
Timing on China.
Yeah, so I would say we were, Secretary Mnuchin and I were on the phone with China last evening. We're going through a lot of, as you say, very, very complicated issues. We've got, if we have an agreement, it'll be 110, 120 pages. It's very, very detailed, very specific. As I say, I'm happy to sit down with members and talk through, particularly members who have specific issues. We're working more or less continuously. Our staffs are getting drafts back and forth, so this is a process that's ongoing. I'll be on the phone again with them tomorrow. As I said, I was on the phone up to...
Your thought is by the end of this month?
9 o'clock. Well, we'll see. As you know, probably more than most members, because of your experience, I don't know when something's going to happen. We're either going to have a good result, or we're going to have a bad result before too long. But I'm not setting a specific time frame, and it's not up to me. I'm working as hard as I can, and the president will tell me when the time is up, or the Chinese will.
So critically, I noticed. I looked at the cases I had filed at WTO when I was USTR. They were all about China. Every single one involved China, and it continues to be our number one issue on this committee. On USMCA for a second. I think it's an improvement over NAFTA. I think you've negotiated a good agreement. I'm supportive of it, as are a lot of my colleagues. However, 232 is a problem in two ways. One, tough for them to ratify with the existing 232. Second, this 232 on autos that's being considered. The President now has a report from Commerce. I know that's not your leadership, but I would hope that you would communicate back the importance of not moving ahead with the 232 on autos, in part so that we can move forward on other things like USMCA. I can't imagine what I'm hearing from the Canadians and the Mexicans already on steel and aluminum, that if we did autos, that we could have a successful completion of USMCA here on the Hill, and that they could be able to ratify it. Any response to that?
Well, I would say I will certainly take back what you tell me to the president, and as I always do. The 232 car thing is complicated, and you probably more than any other member knows where my own position is, where I'm, and how I'm working my way through it. It's a very serious issue, the auto industry and what's happened to the U.S. auto industry. With respect to USMCA and Canada and Mexico on cars, there are provisions that will take them out of it, whatever we do. So, but that doesn't in any way diminish your overall point. I just want to make that technical point. And on steel and aluminum, as you know, we're in discussions with them and trying to find a way out of that dilemma for them and for us.
Finally, WTO, just quickly, as you've expressed, there's a lot of frustration. You listed 5 specific issues we need to address. Again, I approve of every one of them. I think the reform agenda is incredibly important. It is a rules-based body that we can't live without, in my view. Things would be even worse without having a WTO there. Having spent many, many hours, 50,000 feet over the Atlantic, trying to negotiate Doha, back in the day, very frustrating. We couldn't get that done. Doesn't mean we shouldn't move forward, again, with these other agreements. You talked about e-commerce today. We talked about the fisheries agreement. We did do a trade facilitation agreement, which I thought was very positive. Here's my question to you, and it's really a very, very simple one. Is it time for us to look at the consensus idea afresh and to say, does consensus really work? I mean, there has always been a fear among the major trading partners, including us, that if it was by consensus, if it wasn't by consensus, that somehow we could be disadvantaged. On the other hand, consensus isn't working. Let's just be honest. You can't get 98% of the trade in the world, all those countries, to agree on hardly anything anymore, particularly as it relates to reforming dispute settlement. Is there any interest in looking at this issue and trying to get some allies to join us in looking at whether it should be not consensus-based, but based on some sort of a, if it's not majority, maybe it's a supermajority to make decisions.
Well, that's a huge question, and it was perfect timing. You got me down to use up most of your time. So, I'm happy to get involved in that philosophical position. I don't ever want to be in a position, to be honest. I would never recommend that we're in a position where a majority of any countries get around and say we're going to make rules that will have a negative effect on the United States. So,
That's always been.
it's troubling to me that other countries would use this consensus to hurt, to protect their own, in an unfair way, their own economies. On the other hand, I would never recommend anyone to say, let's have 2/3 of the people in the world sit down and vote and make rules that would have a negative effect on the U.S. So to me, the consensus is it's a dilemma. As long as we're required to be in the consensus, it's great. I just don't like other people having it, right? And my guess is they all have the same view. So, so I think the solution is probably to try to do something to reform the things we can reform, and then move in the direction of, like you say, the e-commerce. There are some things you can do on a plurilateral basis and make real headway on, and those things we ought to. Fisheries is kind of trickier, because if 80% of the people say they're going to do something sensible on fisheries, and the other 20%, like China, for example, go out and it's kind of trickier on fisheries. But some things like digital trade are clearly the kind of thing we can move in a plurilateral way.
Thank you. Chairman